We're going to call to order the joint committee meetings of the House and Senate Economic Development Committee, as well as the House and Senate Transportation Committee. I'm State Senator Chip Pearson. To my left is my colleague in the House, Representative Ron Stevens from Economic Development, and to my right, Senator Jeff Mullis of Transportation, and his colleague in the House, Representative Vance Smith. And at this time, before we get started, I'm going to ask Representative Smith if he would open us in a word of prayer.
Don't mind us bow our heads just a minute. Lord, we need to pause for just a minute, and we should do this every day and talk to you and thank you for the many blessings you've given us individually and our families, and this state as a whole and this nation. We always appreciate knowing that your hand is extended. All we have to do is reach out, and you'll just lead us right down that right path. We do thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross and rose again, and we just thank you for the forgiveness of sins, and ask that you be with each family that's represented here. Give safe travel to the ones of those that have come, and we ask that you give us the wisdom to direct this state in the manner that you would have us to go. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
On behalf of both committees and the House and Senate, let me thank all the members who have turned out today. We have a great showing here today for a very important purpose and reason, and I want to thank each one of you that took time from your busy schedule to be here today. And basically today, the reason for this committee meeting is about Delta Airlines and the importance of Delta Airlines to Atlanta region and the state of Georgia in general. Delta, which was born in 1928, moved its worldwide headquarters to Atlanta in 1941 and became, and we still believe, is the largest private employer serving Atlanta and the state of Georgia with 24,000 employees, including approximately 8,000 who work in the corporate offices here in Atlanta. Delta represents a $14 billion, that's billion with a B, dollar economic impact to this region and this state. As many of you know, on September 14, 2005, Delta took a necessary and responsible step to secure their future by voluntarily filing for reorganization under the Chapter 11 code of the bankruptcy law. At this point, Delta is on track to exit bankruptcy in the first half of 2007 as an independent, standalone airline. We're here today because we care about Delta and we care about the employees who sacrifice and who give so much to our communities. At this time, before we introduce Harold Beavis with Delta, I'm going to ask the other chairman if they'd like to take a moment to say anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today. As you know, this is a very important step that we make here to show our support for Delta and to see how best we can assist in this situation. We want to thank all the ones that are involved in the transportation and economic arena in helping to bring those here today that can help guide us to those great decisions. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd just like to say thank you to my committee members. We had a previous meeting from 1 to 3, and we had a great turnout, and we have a great one here today, too. And when you have these important issues and we discuss important companies like Delta Airlines, it's great to see that we have the participation from the members, and it's close to Christmas, but it's great to see such a good crowd, and hope we have a very productive meeting. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I again want to congratulate the phenomenal job in employment for Delta and what you've done over the years. And I want to thank this body, too, for laying the groundwork for economic development over a period of years along, especially this past handful of years, that some reports place Georgia as the #1 future economic state in the country. And I specifically want to thank the hero, in my mind, of economic development, and that's Craig Lesser and his tremendous team here to forgive us that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But we can, right? That's correct. At this time, Harold Beavis, Harold, if you come forward, and we're going to just allow you to introduce the Delta officials here with you today. And just feel free to, as far as your group, any order and
Okay.
any amount of time, as long as we don't go over our
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the committee's indulgence in calling this meeting to bring us up and talk about the most favorite and close thing to our heart, which is Delta Airlines. But I want the committee to understand Mr. Grinstein has a conference call that he has to be on, and we have to leave at 5 o'clock, so I apologize if that time comes, and we don't need to leave early, but we have to be there. And he's got to go back to New York for a bankruptcy hearing tomorrow, so we appreciate your indulgence. We greatly appreciate you calling this hearing to have us come up and have an opportunity to talk. But I want to introduce Jerry Grinstein, our CEO, and Mr. Ed Bastian, our Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer. They're the guys that's got all the smarts today, and we're going to have them talk to us about it. So would Jerry and Ed please come up this time?
It's a very elaborate introduction.
You're working.
Okay. Can I talk or do I wait? No. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, multi-chairman, and all the members of the committee for inviting us here. I have the honor to be the CEO of Delta, and with me is Ed Bastian, our Chief Financial Officer, but that hardly describes his role. Ed was with Delta when I arrived and departed, and then in a utter lapse of judgment came back to the company and was the architect of the plan that we used in order to raise funds when we went into bankruptcy, and that gave us the operating capital. He didn't tell me all of the truths about the situation, fortunately. But if you look back 14 or 15 months ago, Delta was on the ropes, and fuel prices were soaring, and we were hemorrhaging a lot of money. And from that time forward, Ed became our chief restructuring officer, and Delta is well ahead of plan. And you could tell by the offer that came in mid-November that we're worth at least $8 billion, and actually they were trying to steal the company. So I think you'll find that when I talked this morning that Delta is worth infinitely more. He's played an invaluable role along with Jim Whitehurst, our Chief Operating Officer. Before I talk about Delta, though, I want to pay tribute to Senator Johnny Isakson. I spent 12 years on Capitol Hill and have worked with a lot of senators then and thereafter, but I have never seen one who was more able and more sensitive and more compassionate and more effective than Johnny Isakson. He has just done a wonderful job, and when we were fighting to save the pensions, it would have been the easiest thing in the world for Delta to walk away from the pensions for our non-pilots, but he stepped up to the plate, and he arranged to get passed legislation through all of the travails and hurdles that Congress can put up and the administration can put up, and succeeded in getting it passed. And so 90,000 people, active and retired people at Delta, will continue to enjoy their pensions, and it would not have happened without Johnny Isakson. And he has also stepped up to the plate on the situation that we now have with U.S. Air. Today is a very big day for Delta. We did two things today. One was to file a plan of reorganization with the court, which basically describes how the future of Delta and how we expect it to function over the next 5 years. And it's an essential part of the process of coming out of bankruptcy. Ed has borne the brunt of getting that prepared and working with the creditors committee to develop it and to get it in shape. And while they are yet to sign on to it, it does reflect our vision and our aspiration for Delta, and we think it fairly values Delta. And it, I think, sets the stage for Delta to emerge from bankruptcy, which we hope will occur sometime, as Ed says, in mid-spring. The other thing that happened today is that we announced to the world that our board of directors unanimously said no to U.S. Airways' attempt to do a hostile takeover. There has never been a hostile takeover of one airline by another in this country, and it's not about to start here. And we have 45,000 people who have built a reputation for Delta, and they've had their pay cut twice, they've had their benefits changed, they've had their work hours lengthened and made more difficult. And through all of that, they have kept Delta operating at the top of the industry. If you take a look at the J.D. Power survey, which is one of the best guides, the Delta is number one or number two in virtually every category. And so through all of this, they have all of the travail that they've had to go through and all the sacrifices in their personal lives, they have kept Delta performing at the very top of the industry. And it's really been a remarkable performance. And I'd have to say, for somebody to come along and try to take advantage of the reputation they've built up and try to do it at a discount to its real value is unconscionable. So we are going to fight, and I expect we will prevail. I want to mention a couple of things about that. In the first place, U.S. Airways is heavily concentrated along the Atlantic coast. If you were to ask us who our biggest competitor is, it would be U.S. Airways. If you were to ask U.S. Airways who the biggest competitor is, they'd have to say Delta. And so what you would have are two competitors combining, if that were to be approved, and there would be a loss of service to small communities. There would be a lot of monopoly cities. There's an enormous amount of overlap between the two. And so we believe that it would not be approvable by antitrust standards or by the Department of Justice. And so we are pointing out to the world that that is a barrier. What they've asked is that Delta remain in bankruptcy until they get it approved. And what they would contemplate is that Delta would, by staying in bankruptcy, would be able to cut out part of its flying and part of its employment. And when I say part, I'm talking about a significant part of its flying and its employment in order to scale down so that they could then meet their economic goals. And what I would say to that is it is a proposal that is designed for shrinkage by Delta. And it's a proposal that is designed not to expand and not to go into new markets and not to take advantage of geographic business opportunities. It is designed to take advantage of the concentration and the overlap. Beyond that, our pilots have an agreement with us, and one of the provisions that they put in expressly for this kind of situation, I suspect, is that it's a no-shrink provision, and it runs square into the plans for that. And the third thing about it is that it would end up as a merger with $23 billion of debt. If that sounds familiar to you, that is approximately the same debt that Delta had when it filed Chapter 11. Ours is a volatile industry. Things change very rapidly, and you've got to have a decent balance sheet in order to make it go through the difficult times. And with $23 billion of debt, you're so highly leveraged that you would not be an effective competitor. And finally, from the point of view of Atlanta and Georgia, I think one thing that's important is that if we were to look at all of the potential mergers that might take place in the industry, it would not include U.S. Airways. It would wind up that there would be other mergers that would follow it with other carriers, and we would be the weakest of the three surviving carriers. And it would, we see our destiny at Delta is one of growth and expanding business opportunities and moving more and more into international markets. So that is as quick a way as I can say. We would not be happy to see this come about, and our board has unanimously voted it down. And I would expect that at some point in January or February, that our creditors committee will see it the same way. We've worked closely with them. We've shared information with them. We've given them all of the documents and all the relevant materials that they ought to have. At the same time, the plan that Ed has put together calls for Delta to be valued at between $9 and $12 billion. The market, it was made public today. The market has received it well. Our bonds moved up in trading today, and it tells you that our standalone plan is exactly what the direction that Delta ought to be heading. So our goal has to be to head off U.S. Air and to follow through on our plan. I'd like Ed now to say a few words about, say more than a few words, Ed, about the plan and the direction that he sees Delta going. I just want to add to one of the things that was said in the introduction. We have a lot of people in this area. They have done an absolutely fabulous job. We would not be sitting in front of you today but for the 45,000 professionals of Delta and the people that have worked hard. All of them have worked at lower pay, and with that I include our executive ranks, people like Ed and Jim Whitehurst and so on. They've all made sacrifices to stay here, and they do it because they believe in what they're doing, and they're committed to this company and the direction that we're going, and we're very, very fortunate to have them with us. Ed?
Thank you, Jerry, and again, I add to Jerry's comments, thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak to you today. I was here with Jerry a little over a year ago, and it was a very different hearing, and we're pleased to say that everything we told you that we'd implement in terms of trying to get this company back on a sound financial footing, we've absolutely not only implemented, we've exceeded our plan and our expectations. Last year alone, to put it in context in financial terms, Delta Airlines lost about $2 billion in 2005 alone. It's an enormous, enormous amount of money for a corporation to lose. We announced today that we're expected to lose money again in 2006, which we're closing here in the next few weeks, but only about $350 million. So a $2 billion turnaround that we've implemented in the space of the last 12 months, and that's despite the fact that fuel prices are higher. Fuel prices are up almost $800 million for us. So we've implemented actually close to a $3 billion impact in terms of turning the company around. So when Jerry talks about the efforts and the sacrifices and the work of 45,000 dedicated professional men and women of Delta Airlines, we absolutely are delivering on that, on the goals that we set out for ourselves. And it's going to take us, another year, a year and a half in terms of turning this thing solidly profitable. We did project today that we are going to be profitable in 2007. We're looking at profits in the $450 million range, so we're going to continue on the trajectory that we see. We've laid through the restructuring process a very, very solid financial foundation, not just for profitability in 2007, but also with respect to debt. We've reduced our debt from about $17 billion when we filed for court down to about $7 billion. Now, $7 billion still is a lot of debt, but when you look to a company the size of Delta, it's an appropriate level of debt for us to carry. We're close to $20 billion of revenue. It's probably a pretty good foundation. And we also will be coming out of bankruptcy with the best cost structure of any of the network carriers. This industry, the airline industry, is very competitive, and you need to make certain you're always competitive on your cost structure because, as we know, as the economic hiccups come or some of the challenges that face the industry for the future, having a durable cost structure will get you through that, having a low debt and a durable cost structure, and that's the foundation of the plan, and that's why we do believe our plan at the end of the day will be successful. The other thing I wanted to add to Jerry's comments with respect to growth, our plan does call for growth, both here in Atlanta and as well as expanding into the international arenas. We've certainly had to shrink a bit here to get our costs down and right-size the operation, but we're done with that. We're ready to start using our newfound cost structure and the power of our employees and the power of our brand and our service to start growing this great airline once more. The Airways proposal would be to shrink Delta, would be to shrink it at least 10%, probably more, would cost about 10,000 jobs. Most of those I would expect, many of them to be out here, out of the Atlanta-based area. And to contrast that with the Delta plan, we're calling for growth. Our plan we announced today has growth in it. And in fact, we've been recalling employees. We've recalled 1,250 flight attendants, 330 pilots, and 900 maintenance employees just in the last few months alone. So you could not be looking at two different proposals with respect to one of growth and opportunity as compared to one of shrinkage and continued carnage in this industry. So we know where your hearts are. We appreciate all the support and the outreach we've received to date. It's going to be a tough battle. I mean, the financial communities and the hedge funds are out there wanting to trade on the prospect of industry consolidation and having airlines bid up the price of Delta. Delta is not for sale. We're not interested in putting it for sale. We want to emerge as a standalone carrier, and we appreciate your support in doing that. Thank you.
We are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And we have allocated some time for members of the committee if they have questions of the chairman and Mr. Bastian. At this time would be appropriate. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Again, Mr. Bastian, I'd like to ask you this. You said that if they came in, they would reduce the size of Delta. Would you also agree not only in the size of the employment, but in the size of the pay, benefits, and all those other things that come with employment, that would probably be part of their reduction as well?
I think that's right. If you're to look at the pay scales of the employees at Delta, even though we've been through some very hard times, our employees are better paid. They're more productive, and we have a very good relationship with them. I think that would be somewhat jeopardized. Certainly one of the things that we fought very, very hard, and I had my thanks to Jerry's for Senator Isaacson, was to be able to preserve the pension plan for the non-pilot employees, which are the vast majority of employees, and covering retirees are up to 90,000 employees in the Delta system and retirees. It would not have been possible to save that plan without the assistance and support we received from the Congress with respect to extending the period of time we're going to pay that pension bill. Airways went the opposite way 2 years ago. They've taken out all the pension plans of all their employees across the board. It's about a $5 billion bill that they dropped on the government. I don't know. They've not made any commitments that they would continue to seek to retain the Delta non-pilot pension plan. I can tell you that that would be a travesty if that was to occur.
Thank you.
Could I just add one thing to that? They've made the point when they tried to sell this proposal that they're not going to close any hubs and they're not going to lay off any people and they're not going to shrink any service. If you're trying to serve a $23 billion debt, and you think, and they've also said they're not going to increase fares. If you think you can service a $23 billion debt without closing hubs, without laying off people, without raising fares, you believe in Tinkerbell. So from that perspective, it's a non-starter.
Seems like there's a lot of fantasy in this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Douglas.
Mr. Chairman, I believe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just ask either one of you a question. What was the plan for the corporate headquarters? Was that going to be here, or was that going to be, I don't know, whether Pittsburgh or Charlotte or wherever U.S. Air's headquartered?
Well, they're headquartered in Tempe, Arizona, and they have avoided answering that question, saying that's something to be decided. But what I can tell you is that they have an application into the zoning board for a variance in an attempt to build a very large building that doesn't conform to the present code, so they can expand their offices. It doesn't sound to me like their plans would be for Atlanta.
How many, approximately how many jobs do you have here that we could stand to lose in if the headquarters moved to Arizona?
I think it was estimated we have about 8,000 management jobs here.
We have 8,000 across the company. A good number of those, probably 5,000 to 6,000 of those, are based out of Atlanta. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reed.
Thank you. During your visit last year in September and November, we were talking about the kinds of relief. I'm interested in learning what we can do legislation last session regarding job credit benefits. I introduced a bill, not in the Senate, but actually in the House, regarding removing the sales and use tax. I mean, it seems to me there are about three pools of money. You can take the $15 million that we currently have in place, the tax cut for Delta, and extend it out over a 4-year period, represent $15 million a year. We could take the program that Representative Burkhalter talked about, which was a $28 million tax credit, take that out over 4 years, which would come out to about $112 million. We could remove the sales and use tax off of Delta, which would come between $35 and $50 million. I just want to know what do you all want done in order to help. Obviously, we want to tie that to you all remaining a Georgia-based company, and I certainly don't want to interfere with whatever you all have working, but I would like to know what we can do as a General Assembly. But I see those three pools of revenue to come to about $312 million over a 4-year period. So what'll help?
Oh.
We're not usually offered that kind
That's
of.
the first time I've ever seen a chief financial officer turn to somebody else.
All the above?
Usually opens his wallet.
I'm not used to being asked that question.
Yeah, I think actually that it would probably be a mistake for me to try and answer that right now. I do think it's a question, though, that we ought to talk about, because I think some things might be conditioned on the company staying headquartered in Georgia. So I would want to take a very careful look at all of the opportunities and options, and perhaps sit down at some future time and try and develop a program that will do it. That would be one thing. I would add beyond that that we've got 6 attorneys general that have now expressed their opposition or their concern about this merger, and I know Representative Burkhalter has written an editorial, a guest column, and I know that Senator Isaacson's made a speech on the floor, and I think the more voices that we have added to it, expressing concern about what this would do, and more concern about the fact that they don't want this to go ahead, it would be very helpful. I mean, the Department of Justice, the Department of Transportation, and others should hear from people that this is not something they want approved, that they want to go ahead. And in fact, I think Congressman David Scott and Congressman John Lewis also had a session on the floor in which they discussed it. Very moving and very eloquent. So every bit of that kind of voice of protest helps a lot.
Yeah, at this point, the voices are equally important, if not more important than the dollars. The dollars are welcome. I think the job tax training credit, I think, would be one of the 3 that you mentioned that's probably got the greatest appeal and support for us in the short term. But certainly your voices, as Jerry said, is the most important thing we need to hear right now.
One thing you all, may I follow up? One thing you all were clear on last year was the extension, because we're running up on the door of $15 million tax increase.
Right.
And then during your last presentation, we shared that it takes about $900 million when you're in profit to throw off $100 million in cash. I think I heard.
That's about that. Yeah, there's some pretty big numbers, yeah.
I just wanted to know so we can help us out.
Good.
Okay.
No one another.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Senator. I'm pretty certain that they'll be back in touch with us somehow.
Now that we know where you are.
You know where we are. And to Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming down here today. My question, if I understood correctly, you said that if U.S. Airways has their way, it could potentially cost us 8,000 to 10,000 jobs. Is that correct?
There would be 10,000 jobs lost. There's no question about that. The only question is, would it be people being fired, or would there be attrition and them not replacing the jobs? But there's no question that 10,000 jobs would be lost.
Okay, and I'm curious, Delta's gone from a $2 billion loss to a $350 million loss, and recall 1,250 employees?
In total, actually, closer to 2,500.
Yeah.
And you're expecting next year to go from a loss of $350 million to a profit of $450 million, if I understood correctly.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Would you anticipate, or how many jobs would you expect to, or employees that have been furloughed, would you expect to recall over the next 12 months or so? I know that's hard to estimate, but
I would think there's probably continued growth in employment. The 2,500 that I mentioned is largely to anticipate the 2007 schedule needs. So as we look to 2008, we would hire them up in 2007. So we're not to 2008 yet, but I would certainly think there would be probably at least 1,000 people that we'd be looking for.
So we've got some new aircraft coming that really start going into service in July of next year, and that will make a difference in it, and you'll have to call back pilots and flight attendants and ground personnel for all that. So as you add each increment, you get a number of people that go along with it, and the plan is for that to continue through next year and the following.
so it's a potential job swing of about 13,000 employees, roughly.
Over time, probably even bigger than that.
Representative Williams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question is, you'd mentioned that several people certainly stepped up to the plate to help Delta in their time of need, and that's certainly commendable. I live down in Midway. I know you're very familiar with it. So Chairman Stevens lives in a bedroom community of Midway. Where we certainly utilize the airport at Savannah. And my question is, after you emerge from bankruptcy and fend off the attempt by U.S. Air, what's the schedule, or have you set a schedule for bringing the pilots, attendants, maintenance people, reservationists back up with what they've given? What's the plan for making them whole again?
You want to talk about the increases?
Certainly. We've had to tighten our belts, to say it politely, over the last couple of years. And what we have shared with our employees is that once we get back out of bankruptcy, that we are committed to bringing them back up to industry standard in terms of wages. We're not at liberty right now to talk about what that means, because if we did that, we'd have to get the creditors' approval, and the creditors already think our people make too much money. So we're going to get out. It's another reason to get out quicker. One of the other things about the plan that we announced today, based on the profits in that plan, would have substantial profit-sharing payments that would go to our employees. That would be, we project about $200 million in 07 alone, ranging up to over $400 million by 2010 in that year alone. So substantial profit-sharing improvements, and those are one of the things we're looking to change with respect to the compensation going forward, so that in good times we share more of the wealth. When this industry gets into trouble, we sacrifice together. So that's one of the things when we come out of court that we'll be addressing. But we have every intent to continue to bring people back as quickly as we can afford to what we'd consider to be industry standard.
And profit sharing starts at $1. It's not something that you have to hit another threshold before they participate.
Very good. Any more questions from the members? Mr. Chairman.
I'd just like to say I certainly appreciate your presentation, and we have two excellent people that work with us every day in the session, Harold and Dolores out there. We have great people to keep us informed, and we appreciate that.
We're very fortunate to have both of them. Harold is as loyal a person as I've ever met in my life, and Dolores as well. So.
And you need to know he wanted to toss some food with us.
What is Harold going to do in exchange?
Did you want to mention the petition?
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you very much
Okay.
for being here.
There is one thing. I noticed one or two people that are over here keep Delta My Delta. If you can get those buttons, wear them. It sends a terrific message. The other thing is that we started this morning a petition. I think it already has 10,000 signatures on it that we're going to send to Washington, to the Department of Justice, and to the leadership, and let them know how strongly we feel about this. And as you have a chance and an opportunity to sign it, I think it would be a terrific boost for everyone. So I really thank you for your time and your interest in your questions. We've had quite a saga here. It was not exactly what I intended to do in my closing years. On the other hand, you will have wonderful leadership of this company going ahead that understands what Delta's all about, and it's an industry where you never rest or coast. You're always on the top of your game, and we will leave you with not only the great people of Delta, but a wonderful leadership team behind me. So I thank you for all of that.
Thank you very much.
We've got one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, your latest comments were ones that I was really kind of interested in. You've mentioned a couple of sources that might be the influence centers that are going to make decisions about the future of Delta. And I realize it's not the board of directors who you usually use for making those decisions. Which are the places that you'd like comments by those of us who want to support Delta? Would that include creditors, bankruptcy court, or just the two that you mentioned, Transportation and Justice Department?
Well, with one or two exceptions, the Creditors Committee is the traditional mortgage collector that's twirling his mustache and bouncing you out in the cold of night. So I suspect directing it in that area would not be where it would be effective.
Is SunTrust one of those? Is SunTrust Bank one of those?
No, they're not.
Too bad.
We both feel better about that. But the decision makers really are in Washington, D.C. The Department of Justice is the one that's got the decision. And the question in front of the Creditors Committee, one of the questions in front of the Creditors Committee is, could this get approved, and could it get approved quickly? And we believe it will take a long time, during which you can't leave a company like Delta sitting on tenterhooks waiting to see how it plays out. And also that ultimately it has to be turned down because there's so much overlap and compromise and competition. So letting the Department of Justice know that this is something you do not want to see go ahead, and that you'd like to have them take a very careful look at would help. And I think letting the Congress know through Senators Isaacson and Chambliss and through the congressmen who've also been supportive, that you'd like to have hearings in the House and the Senate. The chairman of the Transportation Committee has already announced that he would have hearings, and the chairman of the Commerce Committee in the Senate has said the same thing. Letting them know that you'd like to have hearings because you wanted people to understand that what this merger would do and how it would affect people's lives is a really important thing to do. And that would be helpful to us.
And the resolution maybe from the Georgia House and the Georgia Senate supporting Delta's position might be useful as well?
Very, yes, very useful. You are, I mean, there is a symbiotic relationship that's not always fully appreciated between Delta and Georgia, and they are really one and the same. And an expression like that would be very, very strong. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Harold, is that all from Delta that was
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
testified? All right, thank you.
Appreciate you.
At this time, we're very fortunate to have our U.S. Senator Johnny Isaacson here with us today. We appreciate him so much taking time from his ultra busy schedule to be here with us. Senator.
Well, thank you, Chairman Pearson. I feel like I've come home having spent 17 years in the legislature. It's great to be with you, Chairman Smith, Chairman Mullis, Chairman Stevens, Chairman Pearson. I appreciate the opportunity to come, and I'll be brief, but I will be succinct. There are three reasons that every one of you here and every one of us in all of Georgia should be absolutely aware of the threat to Delta Airlines, which in turn is a threat to all of us, and the significant reasons why keeping Delta, our Delta, is extremely important. First are the employees. As Ed has said and as Jerry has said, and I must say to Jerry, I appreciate his kind and generous comments, but because of Scott Yowie and Dolores and all the others that have worked so hard, Harold Beavis, in keeping us informed, we were able to help in Washington. But the people that really did the help, and it's the people of Delta that are the first reason why we need to fight, they helped because they took pay cuts 2 and 3 times. The pilots jettisoned their pension plan. They work tremendously harder and tremendously longer. They've improved their reliability. Their enthusiasm is contagious if you've gotten on one of their planes lately. They have done everything in the world to deserve to stay Delta Airlines and stay whole. And those employees, more often than not, are tax-paying citizens of the state of Georgia. And a loss of them in terms of numbers and layoff, or worse, in attitude, would be terrible for our state. With regard to their pension, I want to make one point crystal clear. This airline, Delta, and their employees came to us in Washington with sacrifices they were willing to make if we could provide opportunities for them to amortize their debt obligation over a period of time sufficient to protect the obligation. Now, what you have to remember is Delta did this in bankruptcy. The company wanted to make a commitment in bankruptcy to exit bankruptcy, honoring its financial responsibility to its people. The airline that attempts to buy Delta today jettisoned a $5 billion obligation to its people when it exited bankruptcy. And that $5 billion just might as well be 5 of the 8.5 they now want to buy Delta with, and that's just not right. Secondly, the $23 billion in debt that it would take to make this acquisition possible, in fact, ends up being financed on the backs of the Delta employees. And that's just not right. Now, there's a second reason that it's very important, and that's the people of Georgia. If you take the route systems of U.S. Air and Delta and overlay them, you see lines that have white space in between them that become basically, absolutely one large blur, because there is a complete overlay, particularly on the whole east coast of the United States of America. Now, when two competitors go to one, what happens to your flying public? What happens to them is their rates go up. Now, the second thing you look at that is so important to the flying public of Georgia and Georgia's business people are those secondary markets that feed into Atlanta to go to the rest of the world to do their business. People that you represent. The people of Albany, Georgia, of Columbus, Georgia, of Savannah, Georgia, of Augusta, Georgia, whose lifeline to get to Hartsfield and the rest of the world are those commuter flights. In a number of those cities, they are served by U.S. Air and by Delta. If that becomes one airline, what happens? 14 flights a day go to 7, and the prices go up. And accessibility is more difficult for Georgia's businesses and our secondary markets, and it's more expensive for the consumers that fly. And that also applies, I might add, to Meridian, Mississippi, and Asheville, North Carolina, and Tallahassee, Florida. All secondary markets that are integral and part of the hub and spoke system to feed into those hubs. And while mentioning that hub, I think it's very instructive if someone is asked where their hub's going to be to say they haven't determined yet where that's going to be. Chances are they have, they just don't want you to know. And the chances are it's not going to be Atlanta, Georgia, which leads me to my third point. I spent 33 years in the real estate business, and a significant part of it relocating corporations to this great state. Georgia Pacific, when they came back from Portland, Oregon in the 1980s, UPS from Connecticut in the 1990s, Siemens, Heidelberg, Kimberly-Clark. I'll never forget in the Fox River Valley of Wisconsin talking to the executives of Kimberly-Clark, making our pitch on why to come to Atlanta was a good place for them to move that business that had been there for over 100 years. And in the end, they made it clear to me there was one reason. You couldn't get anywhere by air from the Fox River Valley without changing places twice. But you could get anywhere in the world if your business was in Atlanta, Georgia. A lot of people forget that a business person can wake up in his own home in Atlanta, Georgia, go to Hartsfield Airport and have lunch with 80% of America's business people by noon in their hometown and come back that night. You just don't do that in many places in the world. And to have Delta absorbed by another airline and for the hub to possibly not be in this city, it strikes at the heart of that great asset. We have a great state, but there's no question if we didn't have our ports of Savannah and Brunswick and we didn't have Hartsfield International Airport and Delta Airlines, we would not be the economic engine we are today. And trust me, if this merger were to take place, we would not be in the future what we are today. So I urge all of you to do the same thing I'm doing. Talk about this wherever you go. Delta is our airline, and it is an absolutely essential part of the greatness of this state and the economic vitality we enjoy today and the future economic vitality we will have. This is a merger that shall not take place, if I have anything to say about it, and Delta deserves to emerge bankruptcy and enjoy what they've worked and sacrificed for over the past 18 months. I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here, and I congratulate all of you in this holiday season for taking your time to come down here and work on behalf of a great company and the people of this state. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Senator. Questions from the member, Majority Leader?
Senator, I just got through reading a book called Team of Rivals by Abraham Lincoln's presidency. It was quite a good book. It spoke of the day when making speeches was a lot more important than small sections on TV advertisement. It's a pleasure listening to you. Great speech. You just made a good one. I'm proud to have you.
Well, thank you, Tommy. That means a lot. I appreciate it very much. I get passionate about things that are this important, though, and this one's big.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Isaacson, thank you for being here. And, of course, I take kinship to you. You speak like a mountain boy to me, and I'm ready to fight, too, actually. But,
Real estate salesmen can be anything they need to be.
I, too, echo the Majority Leader's comments, but I'd like to also ask you to thank you for your continued effort to help Delta and our entire state, and allow us to partner with your office in this quest, too, and if we can be of service to them, please let us know.
We will. Thank you, Senator Mullis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Have a great Christmas. Merry Christmas to everybody.
All right, at this time we are fortunate to have our esteemed Speaker Pro Tem with us, Representative Mark Burkholder, if he would like to address the joint committees.
Well, I got to say something. I mean, a lot of people gave our senator the accolades on his speaking. I mean, I would draw the analogy to a symphony. I mean, it just kind of keeps rolling and gets prettier by the minute. But what a talent, and we're good fortune to have him as our one of our U.S. senators. Merry Christmas to everybody, and I hope you've done more shopping than I have. I am way behind the curve, but I appreciate the respective chairmen, Stevens, Pearson, Mullis, and Smith, and all the members taking their time out. I know how hard it is this close to Christmas, but I will tell you, you can give Georgia a Christmas present, I think, by doing a couple of things this session. I'm going to follow up on some of your questions, Senator Reed. We've heard a lot about Delta. I'm going to try to put maybe a little different spin on my comments, talk a little bit about U.S. Air, and then talk about what I think are some ideas that we in the General Assembly might want to look at this year. I want you to think about the cultures of U.S. Air and Delta. They're very different cultures. Regardless of the financial motives, you've got one culture that is unionized, one is non-unionized, with obviously the pilots are unionized for Delta. You have one that candidly has poor customer service by most of the rating services. You have one that has good customer service. One that is an Airbus client, and I'm going to talk about that a little more because I think it's sort of an intangible that's going by the wayside, and one that is a Boeing client predominantly. One that has no assets. U.S. Air has very few assets and an overvalued stock, and you sort of have the converse situation with Delta. But I want to talk just for a second about the Airbus culture that U.S. Air has. They buy their planes from the European Union. It is a company that is basically a government-run, heavily unionized, politically correct sort of company that has had huge financial problems. They're hemorrhaging quite honestly. They are cost overruns and delays in delivering their new big 380, the big mega jumbo 500 and some odd passenger plane. But they, just as an example of how dysfunctional they are, as contrast to who Delta buys their planes from. I read recently they literally, to spread out the business in all the European countries, they literally make the fuselage for this plane in 2 different countries. They have half of it's made in France and half of it's made in Germany, and then they assemble it somewhere else and it doesn't fit. The plane, this A380, has some 300 miles of wiring in it, and they're estimating that almost every mile of wire that goes into this new plane that still hasn't been delivered, and it is literally every mile is made in a different part of Europe. So I think that's important to understand, because I think it speaks to not only the poor customer service, but poor decisions that airline has made. And yes, Delta has struggled. They have, I think, should be commended for restructuring and their new route system domestically and expanding internationally. Tough negotiations, I know, with the pilots who've made sacrifices, and I will tell you, it's very encouraging. You see the pilots back here in their uniforms with their buttons on as well, and I want to thank them for being here. You're an integral part of this success of Delta coming out of this tailspin. But it's been said about the overlap of the routes, and I think it's estimated some 50% of these routes in the eastern seaboard and the south will be duplicative, and that's going to be upward pressure on prices. Make no mistake about it. We've talked about the loss of jobs and management positions and the lack of commitment on U.S. Air as to where they're going to have their headquarters. I think that matters an awful lot. The flying public deserves better. If we don't keep Delta a standalone, independent Georgia company, I think you're going to see essentially a consumer tax increase through airfares. And airline experts all over are concluding that. And that's, you need to think about that. I mean, it's not going to be as easy to get out of Atlanta as you thought it was in the past. But I want to talk about the recent maybe editorial I wrote and a couple of comments I made. And I'm sincere about them, and I want you to think about them. I've had the good fortune of going on a couple of economic development trips for their fine commissioner back here. And I will tell you, wherever you travel, whatever the language barriers there are, it is amazing to me how when you talk about Delta Airlines and the prospect of a new service from Atlanta to Beijing or wherever the spot is around the globe, that language barrier gets broken down. They perk up just not about the connectivity possibility between Atlanta and their country and the business and commerce that might come from it. They perk up about having Delta make that connectivity. And it's fascinating, whether it's Beijing, Tel Aviv, or in Europe, I will tell you, it is a common denominator you see. I also know that we ought to be thankful for where we are. In the last couple of years, I've tried to sell a couple ideas to try to help Delta to the General Assembly. And I tried to make the case that aside from the economic impact, aside from the 25,000 employees, and the economic impact being nearly the size of our annual budget in Georgia, that a lot of the businesses we have here today and the luxuries we have here today would not be here had it not been for Delta making Georgia a gateway to the world. And you can't have one without the other. I mean, you look at Kia, you look at Newell Rubbermaid, you look at every major announcement. I guarantee you, and I've spoken with a lot of these CEO and board members who made the decision ultimately to come to Georgia, and there again, that common denominator is Delta and the connectivity. We tend to forget about that. Here we are trying to lure new businesses into Georgia, and we think about all the jobs that are going to come from it, but just try to imagine making that sales pitch with Atlanta not being a gateway city. Go to Birmingham, go to some of these other southeastern. They'll tell you how hard it is to make a sales pitch without having a Delta Airlines there. And I noticed the an ad, a full-page ad, just to further make my point for a minute, that Commissioner Lester, I assume you're responsible for. It's basically an ad we place to sell Georgia. And I want you to read, I'm going to read just for a second the first couple of sentences of it, and I hope it brings home what I'm saying a little better. Georgia is your connection to the world, a place where companies have a global reach, home to the world's #1 airport with nonstop flights to more than 40 international cities. That's the first 3 sentences we have in the very sales pitch we make when we spend our tax dollars to try to sell this state and grow it. What can we do? I think a couple of things, Senator Reid, and you alluded to them earlier. The number 2, if not the #1 expense item I know for an airline is jet fuel. Quite candidly, if jet fuel had not spiked like it is, I think Delta would be in a very different posture right now. But things being what they are and some things out of our control, we did, and thanks to all you who supported it. I know it was tough for some folks in certain areas of the city, in Clayton County specifically, and I appreciate you guys. You guys were great friends in the process, and I know it was tough to sell locally, but we capped the sales tax on jet fuel. And I think that's important. Whenever the decision is going to be made as to whether or not this merger takes place, I think a little degree of certainty in a very uncertain time can help Delta. So I would suggest, and I hope you'll join with me this year, I'm going to propose we have a sunset on that cap, sales tax cap, and I hope you'll join with me in extending it. I think it's important. It's a huge windfall to the state when prices spike, and it'd be easy for us to sit back and just collect extra dollars. But I'm going to ask you to join me in releasing that sunset and trying to make it permanent. The job retraining tax credits that Senator Reid mentioned earlier. I had a bill last year, passed the House. We didn't get it out of the Senate. But I hope we can have different fortune this year. What it does is basically let Delta recapture tax credits that they have earned for retraining employees. They spent the money. The Georgia law said invited them to retrain employees. We'll give you a $500 tax credit, and they've not been able to recapture this money. And I know some of these tax credits are lapsing because they were earned in years past, and there's a limit as to the time in which they can recapture them. They're Delta's credits. They haven't been able to take them because they can only offset them off income, and you've heard the stories about losing money, not making money. I proposed last year, and I asked that we do it again this year, to let them offset it off the payroll taxes, which will allow them to trigger that money right away. There again, is it an amount of money that's going to save Delta? No. But I think messaging, we have an opportunity in our legislative session, the time before we commence our work, and these individuals ultimately make the decision on Delta's fate and our fate, to make a statement, and I hope you'll join with me on that one as well. And lastly, I think we've all talked about the Department of Justice and Department of Transportation. I would hope that we could all sign a letter, joint committees that are here today, encouraging the Justice Department not to approve this monopoly that will ultimately hurt consumers. So with that, I talked too long, but thank you for your indulgence, and wish you all happy holidays.
Very well done. Thank you so much, Representative Pro Tem. Is there any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, they could. If we give them the option, it depends. I don't know when they're planning on turning that profit. I know that's sooner than later, hopefully. But I still think, in the spirit of letting them know that we're behind them, that it'd be well advised to act on it early in the session if we could. Thanks for the question.
As you know, I represent Clayton County, and as the newly elected chairman of the delegation, it's my obligation to make sure I protect my constituents the best I possibly can. Mm-hmm. Now, what effect will this have as far as the permanent taxes that you are asking or requesting. At first, I was going to ask a question to the chairman there, but what advantage would the takeover have? How would it affect Clayton County? But what you're talking about now is kind of a different story as far as the taxes that we need. Clayton County, we do need, a certain percentage. Our children have to be educated. We have to deal with our roads. We have to deal with the hospitals. And, we are concerned in Clayton County, and I want you, say a few words on what effect are we talking about on the citizens of Clayton County?
Yeah, a legitimate question, and I would say that when you and I spoke about this a couple of years ago, we passed the cap. That essentially, when this jet fuel was spiking, and the price of the fuel was spiking, that I would submit to you, and not in a bad way, Clayton County was experiencing a windfall from it, like the state of Georgia was. There again, we could have sat back and just had a little extra money, just like when gas went up for consumers at the pump. We decided to cap it for a while. Clayton County, if you look at your budget there, I think you'll see that Clayton County's budget has only grown, and the large part from the jet fuel that you reaped a windfall from before we capped it. But the bigger picture is this, and I made this comment to you back a couple of years ago, and I appreciate the way you received it, is the greater impact that would take place to Clayton County if you lost 6,000 jobs. Just imagine. A lot of those folks live in your county. I would submit to you that's far greater than any shortfall that Clayton County may receive from extending this cap. I don't think they're going to receive a reduction in their revenues from it, from capping it and keeping it capped. The history proved otherwise. But I would just ask you to think about that. It's a far greater hit if Delta is in a different posture than it would be otherwise.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, it's just hard for me not to say I recognize exactly what you're saying, but you just listened to the entire state. Why not the state share it? And that would just take a raising of the dollars amount. We could all share and it won't just be for Clayton County.
No, it's actually both. It's actually both. When we tax, we have local tax, sales tax, obviously, and state sales tax. When we capped it, it was for both, including state revenues.
But the state could actually take a bigger hit than what they are doing as a result of what is affecting directly from Clayton County.
They could.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. Absolutely. And we'll talk about it. But thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll tell you, I feel a little strange with following Senator Isaacson and Speaker Pro Tem Mark Burkhalter. I feel like the concert's a little bit out of order. The warm-up acts are usually in the beginning. I don't know if I've had an opportunity to talk to you all about the transportation funding crisis in Georgia. I haven't had an opportunity. If I hadn't, I'll sure to get you at some point. Hey, I want to thank the committees, which I would have been on one of this committee had I still been in the General Assembly after 8 years, serving on the House Transportation Committee for all 8 years. But I want to thank the committees for their leadership on this. And I actually, on a national level and from the state, I want to thank Senator Isaacson and Representative Burkhalter for his leadership here in the state, because they've picked up the banner, and rightfully so, and done a great job. I want to thank, and several have mentioned this, the employees. Delta's like the rest of us in our companies. We all make mistakes. Sometimes we have to pick ourselves up by the bootstraps and move on, and I think they've done that. But it's really, this thing's been, the brunt of this has been borne by the employees. And, the employees, as Representative Burkhalter mentioned, they're our friends and our neighbors. My youngest daughter's soccer coach is a Delta pilot. So these are people that are not, strangers to us. They're our neighbors and our friends and soccer coaches. And so I want to thank them as much as anybody because they've stepped up to the plate. Senator Isaacson and I talked briefly about the help that we can at DOT can render for this issue at the federal level with Mary Peters, and he and I will talk about this tomorrow, and I will talk with Commissioner Lindenthal about this on Thursday in a meeting with him. Just a few numbers, and I don't have to tell you a whole lot about the numbers, but just real quick, because I know the TV cameras are gone, and it's y'all like me, you figured out yesterday that Christmas was in a week, and so you're all behind the times. 50 million passengers Delta has brought through the gates of Hartsfield-Jackson over the years, which represents 72% of all the people that have been through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. We talk a lot about logistics. 211 metric tons of freight Delta Airlines moves through Hartsfield-Jackson. That represents 34% of the overall freight moved through the airport in 2006. Those are huge, huge numbers. But I guess really what I want to talk about or just mention real quick, Atlanta is famous for a lot of things and worldwide famous for some things. And you think of events that Atlanta's famous for, certainly you think of the Olympics. You think of people, you certainly think of Martin Luther King, President Carter, Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, and those things they're Atlanta. I mean, when you say Martin Luther King or you say Jimmy Carter or you say the Olympics in '96, that's who we are. That's Atlanta and that's Georgia. I'd like to say this, and Mark kind of touched on it. We need to send a message because Delta is Atlanta, and Atlanta is Delta, just like Martin Luther King is Atlanta, and Atlanta is Martin Luther King, and just like the 1996 is Atlanta, the Olympics in '96. Those are all part of who we are. So I'd ask you to do today what Representative Burkhalter said, and said send a message to the creditors that Delta is Atlanta, send one to the Justice Department that Atlanta is Delta, send one to the would-be taker-overs that Delta is Atlanta, and send one to the employees that Delta is Atlanta and how much you mean to us. And that's all I'd want to say because I think everything's been pretty much said. But keep up the fight because they really are our neighbors and our friends. And I don't want to lose that because I think about that friend of mine who I coach soccer with and have for several years, who's a Delta pilot. And he is a part of Atlanta and a part of my life because of Delta, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very well done. At this time, we are so very fortunate to have our equally esteemed Commissioner of Department of Economic Development with us. And I'm going to get off script here for a moment with the consent of the chairman. Unless there's another meeting scheduled, I'm going to presume that this will be your last address as commissioner to the legislative body of the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
With that in mind, I would like to take this opportunity personally to comment on your tenure. I first met the commissioner when he came in to the Board of Economic Development, which I at that point was a member before I was in the Senate. And if my memory is correct, we served together there for approximately 6 months. 2 years have gone by, and now we have served in this capacity together for 6 months. I hope it's not an omen of things to come. As I left there and you're leaving here, but nonetheless, on behalf of this committee and this joint committee and the joint committees, I would like to say that it's been a tremendous pleasure to work with you, sir. As far as heading a department in the state of Georgia or any state in this country, I don't know that we could do or could have done any better than you. And I would like to give him certainly a round of applause from the committee, and if any other would like to make the chairman would like to make that comment at this time would be appropriate. Till the end. Mr. Chairman.
I can say, wow, we've got Kia down in my district. What do I need to say? People in my man, I don't. I'll tell you, Craig, he's worked hard. He's traveled all over the world. He's probably have jet lag from those 12 months. But, I got to say, you're a great friend. And I hadn't known you that long, but wow, you're easy to get to know. You not only helped our area, you helped the whole state of Georgia. So it's all of 9 million of them. A big pat on the back. I appreciate the friendship and look forward to continually working with you. And congratulations. And just appreciate what you've done for me.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I think I'll just leave it at that and just say that it's, we had an economic outlook meeting last week in Savannah, and everything, the chairman our commissioner was spoken up almost every sentence about where we are and where we're going, quite honestly, and it's all about momentum. As you look at the back row, the people that work in the department, if you look at where the state is in comparison to where it was, the phenomenal momentum of where we're going in the future is nothing but bright, and I just want to thank you for giving my kids an opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I would like to say, my good and dear friend, Craig Lesser, what an experience it has been for me to learn and grow under your guidance. And you have done a yeoman's work for the people of the state of Georgia. And, of course, you have a great team. And we'd like to feel the same kinship of being partners with you as this legislative body has helped move Georgia ahead. And thank you for all your hard work and your beautiful family. And I know they kind of get you back because we've had you on a gallop around the globe for our state. And you've helped turn us around, turn this big ship of Georgia around. And thank you for all your hard work. And I look forward to working with you in the private sector as well.
Thank you.
Senator Reed.
I just wanted to speak from our side. I actually met Mr. Lesser while I was trying to recruit him to come to Atlanta and work with our mayor. And our loss was Georgia's gain. So I just wanted to tell you how grateful I am. And I wanted to tell you, just in public from our side, we appreciate you as much as everybody else does. And we're really honored and have been honored by your service.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other members?
So what do you have to say?
Forgive me, Delta Airlines, for taking this time, but thank you.
Any other member? Let's show our appreciation.
Oh, boy, you are not making this easy. Chairman Stevens, Chairman Pearson, Chairman Mullis, Chairman Smith, members of the Joint Committee, thank you all very, very much for your very kind and gracious comments. And it has been an unbelievable honor to have served the people of the state of Georgia, as you do, every single day. And I appreciate the governor allowing me to be in this position. Thank you very much. You mentioned our employees, and that's really a nice segue to talk about Delta and the employees of Delta Airlines, with whom I've had great contact over the last 2.5 years, now reaching beyond 2 million sky miles. I want to be correct, it's not frequent flyer miles any longer, it's sky miles. You've heard today in such eloquent terms so many incredible things about the impact of Delta Airlines in our community. You've heard about 25,000 employees, about $14 billion in annual economic impact. But I want to talk about something maybe a little bit different that I think affects each and every Georgian
in a very, very special way. And what I want to emphasize is the hometown nature of Delta Airlines and its employees. Because even in bankruptcy proceedings, Delta has made a commitment to the community of this state as a hometown company. We often judge the character of a company by its community efforts. And we're blessed in Georgia to be served by a number of major corporate entities that believe giving back is good business. And as a hometown company, Delta is a leader in this regard. And I'm going to walk you through some examples that may sound a little repetitious, but I think it's important to fully realize the impact and the reach, the tentacles of Delta Airlines and its employees. Over 5,000 local employees actively participating and supporting Delta's formalized volunteer program called Community Partners, which provides volunteers for over 75 different local charities and schools, such as Hands On Atlanta, Christian City, Hosea Feed the Hungry, Cool Girls, Boys and Girls Club, Girls Incorporated, Drew Charter School, Hapeville Elementary School, Mount Olive Elementary, Hendricks Elementary, United Way, the American Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, the Arthritis Foundation, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Canine Assistance, Aid Atlanta, and the American Cancer Society. But it doesn't stop there. Last year, employees of Delta Airlines donated almost 4,000 pints of blood in our state. And that makes Delta the largest corporate donor of blood in the entire Southeast region. Over 200 Delta employees and their families support the American Cancer Society Relay for Life in Fayetteville. They've raised $100,000 for cancer research and treatment. 500 Delta employees each year participate in Habitat, providing affordable housing for deserving families. And since 1999, Delta employees have built 32 homes in the Atlanta area. Employees raised over $10,000 annually, and the foundation of Delta donates $25,000 and an in-kind gift of over $100,000, making Delta Airlines the presenting sponsor of Aid Atlanta. Delta Airlines and their employees have donated an average of $50,000 each year in cash in support of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And this year, United Way's efforts, Atlanta-based employees for Delta Airlines have donated approximately $425,000 to the Metro Atlanta United Way. Now, that's the kind of participation that a hometown company encourages. That's what community leadership is all about. And so I want to repeat, even in bankruptcy proceedings, Delta continued its participation. And I think we have all experienced companies that have used bankruptcy as an excuse to say, we really can't do that now. We can't afford to. We're in bankruptcy. And they use that as the ticket to say, we don't have to do it. We don't have to participate. Delta has not done that. I want to repeat, even in bankruptcy proceedings, Delta is the hometown team, the hometown company. Moving the local economy forward, and you heard Speaker Burkhalter's remarks about the world and experiencing the world and bringing the world together as an economic development point. You heard Senator Isaacson talk about that. Both of them spoke so eloquently about economic development and the connection with Delta Airlines and Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Moving the local economy forward is another example where the home team is a major player, because it fully understands and appreciates that what is good for the local economy is good for its business. Delta is a leading local company that engages in moving the Georgia economy forward. Some examples. Members in all major chambers in Metro Atlanta and every city Delta flies in the state of Georgia. Cornerstone members of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Members of the Georgia Allies, and I'm going to come back to the Georgia Allies in just a moment. The Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, Forward Atlanta, Central Atlanta Progress, ACVB, Hemisphere, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. The Atlanta Hispanic Chamber, the German American Chamber, the French Chamber, and a number of other bilateral chambers. And we are growing our international presence in this community, and Delta plays a very, very important role. They're, of course, sponsors of events, sporting events, cultural events. Of course, they have been, for a long time, sponsors of our teams, the Braves, the Falcons, the Hawks, the Thrashers, Georgia Tech, and the University of Georgia, as well as the Chick-fil-A Bowl, the Peachtree Road Race, the Tour de Georgia, which is something near and dear to our department in terms of economic development and support for tourism around the state, Phillips Arena, the Georgia Dome, the Atlanta Motor Speedway, and the Carter Center, all contributing to tourism in this state, which is, I might remind you, one of the most incredible economic development drivers in our state. Oh, and in terms of cultural engagement, this is a company that is in bankruptcy proceedings but continues to encourage the cultural arts and the cultural understanding in our community, with support for the Woodruff Arts Center, UNICEF Atlanta United Way, the King Center, the Atlanta Symphony, the Alliance Theater, the High Museum, Zoo Atlanta, the Atlanta History Center, the Fox Theater, Children's Miracle Network, Hands On Atlanta, and, as I've mentioned, Habitat for Humanity and others. All this and literally hundreds of other community efforts and organizations in the metro area and throughout the state of Georgia, from a company that is in bankruptcy proceedings and could easily say, we can't afford to do this right now, but they don't back away. And I want to close, ladies and gentlemen, with two very specific examples that relate to economic development, public-private partnerships, of which we have encouraged many in the last few years. And they have really resulted in great success for this state in terms of economic development. Hemisphere Incorporated, which many of you know, has been our effort to achieve the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas in the Western Hemisphere and have that secretariat, the office, here in Atlanta. Well, it does not appear that the Free Trade Agreement is going to be agreed to any time soon. But for the last 3 years, we've used that effort to spread the marketing opportunities, the visibility, the news about Georgia being a great place to do business in the Western Hemisphere. Now, in 2004, our team made 75 trips in the Western Hemisphere. In 2005, we came up a little bit short. We only made 299 trips. We could not have made those trips without the support of Delta Airlines and the support for the economic development, progress, initiatives, and future for the state of Georgia. And there's one other that I do want to close on, and that's the Georgia Allies, which has been, since the Olympics, a very effective public-private partnership comprising some of the major Atlanta and Georgia corporations in partnership with the Georgia Department of Economic Development to market the state and to bring additional capital dollars into this state, doing the kinds of things that aren't always easy for our department to do by ourselves, working together. Delta has not walked away from that. They could easily do that because they're in bankruptcy proceedings, and they haven't done that. So I will close by repeating something that matches so well the direction of the state of Georgia, as outlined by Speaker Burkhalter. But Mr. Grinstein really said it earlier today when he said, our plan is growth, opportunity, and moving into international markets. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the future for the state of Georgia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. From the bottom. Seeing none, thank you again for your appearance here today, again for your service to the state. I think you very much summed up at the end of the day what Delta is. It's very easy to look at large companies and think that they're something other than simply a combination of people working together, serving other people. And at the end of the day, it's been said over and over, these are our neighbors, our friends, our co-workers, folks who work with our kids, volunteer, and as you have done a great job of putting together this list, contribute in many ways to our communities, even in the most dire straits from them financially. And we certainly appreciate all that Delta continues to do along that line. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all very much for your support over the last 2.5 years. Thank you.
From the chairman, any additional comments or? remarks that we need to make?
Only for the members of the House, if you'll make sure that I know you're here so you can get paid before you leave.
Thank you for having your money. Thanks for all our residents. We have great.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. This is my last meeting on the House Transportation. And I'm so proud to be a part of this team. We have a great team here in Georgia. And I wish the best for this state. And if I can ever be of any assistance to any of you, let me know. Thank you for being my friend. God bless you.
Thank you. I think one closing note. We've certainly heard some suggestions of things that we can do immediately now, and one of those, with the permission of my co-chairman, would be to get together a letter from the joint committees of transportation and economic development, and get everyone to sign on those as soon as possible, and get those out to the appropriate folks. Additionally, we'll work on getting together a resolution, a joint House-Senate resolution for Delta that hopefully we'll be able to move through very quickly as soon as we convene early part of January. So we'll work on those immediately. Mr. Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I should have asked him, do we have any idea what the timeline is on this whole process? When we might expect some sort of conclusion on this?
Anyone from Delta want to answer that?
Yes, the meetings began with our creditors committee last Wednesday, and continue. There's another one tomorrow. The creditors committee has to review this thoroughly and has to make certain in their minds that this is in their own best interest. And they will likely take their time doing that. We will continue to press our message with them, but ultimately they have to vote on our plan that we submitted this morning. And we would expect that vote to come sometime in the February-March time frame.
If I could one follow-up, who makes the ultimate decision on closing? I mean, who is the ultimate decider on whether or not that's going to happen?
Our creditors committee and then the bankruptcy judge overseeing that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know, it's very easy for those of us while we're here in Atlanta to understand this. But I think one of the challenges is as we go back to our communities that are relatively far back away from Atlanta, to get them to understand the importance of Delta too. I think it would be good as you get the resolution or as the letters, if you could have some press releases prepared that we can take to local newspapers in our areas, things that will help us to spread the message in those communities might also help.
That's a great point. Jeremy, you were taking notes?
In the Senate and the House.
Does the House have somebody from their info office? Okay. We can get something together. Jeremy does a lot of our senators' weekly column. We can get a column put together, generic, and get it out to the members, and they can get it to their local paper.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing that you can do, Jerry alluded to it earlier, the KeepDeltaMyDelta.org website that our employee-based board council created and put out there this morning will have information on the impact of Delta throughout the state of Georgia as well as the other states and communities that we serve. And on that same website, we will have the link to allow you to sign the electronic petition going forward.
Also, Mr. Chairman, if Delta could help guys with a letter, perhaps 2 or 3 different angles that our different committees could foster signatures for, we appreciate it. At least by 5:30 this afternoon.
Very good. Again,
Or Christmas Day.
let me thank everyone for coming. Until we meet again, January, May. Merry Christmas, God bless.